February wind cut across the cemetery like a promise no one intended to keep. Frozen mud crunched under dress shoes that weren't built for ranch country. Diesel exhaust from idling trucks mixed with the smell of overturned earth, dirt so cold it looked gray instead of brown. 20 mourners huddled around a pine casket, breath clouded, hands shoved deep in coat pockets. The girl stood apart, 9 years old, no gloves, clutching a dented tin box against her chest like it held the only truth left in the world. Her coat was too thin for the wind. No one moved to share theirs. The preacher finished. Before the first shovel of dirt hit wood, a man in a camel hair coat stepped forward. "We'll take her now." Marlo Ashby didn't look at the girl when he said it. He spoke to the Reverend like she was furniture being claimed after an estate sale. His wife opened the Cadillac's back door, engine running, warm air spilling out into February cold. "Nora, get in the car." The girl didn't move. "Nora." Marlo's voice dropped a register. Not quite a threat. Not quite anything you could call him on later. She shook her head once. His hand shot out, grabbed her wrist hard enough that the tin box fell, hit frozen ground with a metallic thud but didn't open. A rancher in a worn Carhartt jacket stepped between them. Let her go. Marlo released her, smoothed his coat like nothing had happened, smiled the way men smile when they're used to winning. "This is family business, Thorne." Caleb Thorne looked at the girl. Her wrist was already bruising. Her eyes were empty in a way that made his chest hurt. Then why is she shaking? Marlo leaned close. Close enough that Caleb could smell expensive cologne and something underneath it, something sour, like desperation wearing a good suit. "You have no idea what you just started." Caleb picked up the tin box from the frozen mud. Nora followed him to his truck without being asked. Didn't speak the entire 20-minute drive up the mountain road. The ranch house smelled like cold stone and decades of wood smoke. Ice storm had taken the power lines down that morning. County said they wouldn't reach his road until spring. Maybe April. Maybe later. Caleb didn't mind. He'd lived without electricity before. He lit the old railroad lantern instead, the one his great-grandfather had carried building the transcontinental line in 1892. Warm yellow light filled the kitchen, pushed shadows into corners where they belonged. Nora sat at the table still wearing her funeral coat, tin box on her lap. She hadn't let go of it since the cemetery. Caleb busied himself at the wood stove, heating milk in a dented saucepan. His hands remembered the motions from another life. 20 years since his wife died pregnant, taking their unborn son with her. He'd sworn he'd never heat milk for a child again. Funny how promises broke when you weren't looking. "You allergic to anything?" She shook her head. He poured the milk into a chipped mug, set it in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it, but didn't drink, just stared at the lantern. "Grandpa had one just like that." Her voice came out small but steady. "He said it saved his life once." Caleb sat across from her. "How's that?" "He got lost in a blizzard when he was young, almost froze. Said he followed a lantern light for 2 miles before he realized it was his own reflection in the ice." She looked up. "Kept him moving. Movement kept him alive." The scent of warm milk mixed with the wood smoke. Outside, wind rattled the window frames. "Your grandpa was a smart man." "He said you were smarter." She said it matter of fact, like she was reading from a book. "Said you walked away from a fight most men would have killed for." The words hit like a fist to the sternum. Pete Ashby had been the only family member who'd spoken to him after the inheritance dispute tore the Murdochs apart. 20 years of silence from everyone else. And now this, a child carrying messages from a dead friend like some kind of ghost messenger. What else did he say? Nora opened the tin box, withdrew a folded letter, edges worn soft from repeated reading. She didn't hand it over, just read aloud in that careful voice children use when they've memorized something important. "Caleb, if you're hearing this, I'm gone, and Nora needs you. Marlo's been circling like a vulture for 3 years. He knows about the mineral rights, uranium under the ranch, worth millions. My lawyer drafted a will leaving everything to Nora, Marlo, as guardian. I wrote a second will, handwritten, legal in Wyoming if witnessed. Name's you. It's in the box. Isaiah Watts from the church signed it. So did Doc Harrison. Protect her. They'll come for the money. Don't let them take her soul with it. Pete." Caleb's throat tightened. The stove ticked as metal expanded in the heat. "When did he write that?" 3 days before he died." She folded the letter with precise creases like she'd done it 100 times. "Made me memorize where you lived. Drew me maps of the mountain roads. Marlo know about this?" "No." She looked at him with eyes too old for 9 years. Grandpa said secrets stay secret if you only tell one person. Outside, headlights swept across the kitchen window. A truck engine idled, then shut off. Heavy boots on the porch steps, confident, unhurried. Caleb stood, moved to the window, black Cadillac in his driveway, Marlo, Ashby, and two men in suits climbing out, breath clouding in the cold. "They followed us," Nora whispered. "Stay here." He opened the door before Marlo could knock. Marlo didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped onto the porch, flanked by the two lawyers like a man accustomed to intimidation working in his favor. "Caleb, we need to talk about the girl." "She's got a name." "Nora, fine." Marlo's smile didn't reach his eyes. "She's family. We've made arrangements. Boarding school in Denver, trust fund managed by professionals. She'll want for nothing. Except anyone who gives a damn about her." One of the lawyers stepped forward, weasel-faced, briefcase that probably cost more than Caleb's truck. The smell of expensive leather and cologne filled the porch. "Mr. Thorne, we're prepared to be reasonable. But the law is clear. Mr. Ashby is next of kin. Temporary custody papers were filed this morning." He produced a document, held it out. Caleb didn't take it. "You filed custody papers before the man was in the ground?" Marlo had the decency to look uncomfortable for half a second. "Peter's death was expected. We wanted to ensure a smooth transition for Nora's sake." "Her sake, right." Caleb crossed his arms. "Where were you 3 days ago when Pete was dying? Week before that? Month?" "I'm not answering to you, Thorne. This is a family matter." "Funny thing about family." Caleb's voice stayed level. "Usually shows up during funerals, not just after." The second lawyer spoke, a woman with ice in her voice and a briefcase twin to the first. "Mr. Ashby has legal standing. You don't. If you don't surrender the child voluntarily, we'll involve the county sheriff by morning. Do you really want this to escalate?" Caleb thought about the handwritten will in that tin box, about Pete's letter, about the way Nora's wrist had bruised when Marlo grabbed her at the cemetery. "She stays here tonight. You want to involve the sheriff? Go ahead, but she's not leaving this ranch unless she wants to." Marlo's pleasant mask cracked. "You're making a mistake. Wouldn't be my first." The weasel lawyer pulled another paper from his briefcase. "Probate notice, Mr. Thorne. Peter Ashby's estate enters a 120-day review period as of today. If no valid will contest is filed, estate defaults to next of kin per Wyoming Statute 26101. He pressed the paper into Caleb's hand. "That's Mr. Ashby." Marlo leaned close. His breath smelled like whiskey trying to hide behind mints. 120 days, Caleb. Then she's mine. The ranch is mine. And whatever's under it is mine. You can play hero for 4 months if it makes you sleep better. But come May, I win." They left. Headlights swept back down the driveway, red taillights disappearing into February darkness. Caleb looked at the probate notice. The deadline typed in clean bureaucratic certainty. April 28, 1975. Inside, Nora stood in the kitchen doorway. Lantern light behind her made a small shadow that stretched across the floor to his boots. "He's going to take me, isn't he?" Caleb folded the paper, slipped it into his coat pocket. "Not if I can help it." She almost smiled. "Grandpa said you'd say that." The smile faded. "He also said you'd need help, that you couldn't win this alone." "He say who'd help?" "A lady who keeps records, a preacher who tells the truth." She paused. "And something frozen that won't stay frozen forever." The county courthouse smelled like linseed oil and 80 years of bureaucratic permanence. Ruth Brigham had worked the records room since 1947, and she knew every filing cabinet, every misfiled deed, every drawer that's stuck in humid weather. When Caleb and Nora walked in, she was kneeling in front of an open vault surrounded by scattered papers. Her hands trembled, not from age, but from rage. "Mrs. Brigham." She looked up, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Caleb Thorne. Heard you were causing trouble with the Ashby estate. Didn't know defending a child counted as trouble." Ruth stood, knees popping, dusted off her skirt. She studied Nora for a long moment. "You're Pete's granddaughter. Got his eyes." Nora nodded. "He was a good man. Came in here twice a month like clockwork, checking land records, survey maps, always polite, always tipped his hat." Ruth's expression darkened. "Which is why I don't appreciate vandals destroying his legacy." She gestured to the vault. The lock mechanism was scratched. Metal shavings on the floor caught the overhead light. Inside, drawer F-1892 hung open, empty. "When did this happen?" "Discovered it this morning. Vault was locked when I left last night. No sign of forced entry on the building. She pulled her cardigan tighter. Whoever did this had a key. Caleb felt ice in his stomach. What was in that drawer? Original homestead deeds for all properties filed between 1890 and 1895. Railroad land grants, mineral rights transfers, survey plats. She pointed to the empty space. Your family's ranch, Thorne property, 3,000 acres, filed April 1892. That deed should be here. It's not. The radiator hissed in the corner, warm air mixing with the smell of old paper and floor wax. Could it have been misfiled? Ruth gave him a look that could have curdled milk. I've been filing documents for 28 years. I don't misfile. Nora tugged Caleb's sleeve. Grandpa said the ranch was like a tree with roots going back to the beginning. He said some people only see branches, but roots are what matter. Ruth's eyes softened. Smart girl. Your grandpa understood land law better than most lawyers. She turned to Caleb. Without that original deed, proving continuous ownership is going to be hell. Marlo's lawyers will claim gaps in the chain of title. What do I need? Proof. Deed, survey maps, tax records, anything showing unbroken Thorne ownership since 1892. She paused, but most of those records cross-reference the original homestead patent, which is now missing. Caleb's hands clenched. This wasn't random. No. Ruth pulled him aside, voice dropping. Someone knew exactly which drawer to hit. That takes knowledge. Either they researched your property history, or they had help from someone who works here. Ruth's jaw tightened. I've got 3 clerks. 2 been here less than a year. Third one, Jerry Hollis, just bought a new truck, cash, on a county salary. Outside, a car door slammed. Footsteps on the courthouse steps. Ruth moved to the window. Speaking of which, Judge Cordell's office smelled like pipe tobacco and leather-bound law books. He sat behind a desk that had probably witnessed 50 years of Wyoming disputes. Water rights, property lines, family feuds that lasted generations. Marlo sat to the left, flanked by his weasel lawyer. Caleb sat to the right, Nora beside him. No lawyer. Couldn't afford one on what the ranch brought in. The judge examined both wills, the typed one, crisp and professional, the handwritten one, Pete's shaky script on lined paper. But, Thorne, you're claiming this handwritten document supersedes the properly executed will filed with Mr. Ashby's attorney. I'm claiming it's what Pete wanted, signed and witnessed legal in Wyoming. The weasel lawyer leaned forward. Your Honor, handwritten wills require 2 living witnesses to be valid under Statute 26112. Mr. Thorne claims Isaiah Watts and Dr. Harrison witnessed. Dr. Harrison died 6 months ago. Convenient. Caleb's chest tightened. Isaiah's still alive. He'll testify. Will he? Marlo's voice was smooth as creek ice. Because I spoke with Reverend Watts yesterday. He seemed quite confused about the whole matter. The judge studied the handwritten will, frowned. The second signature here says I. Watt, not Isaiah Watts. Same person, Caleb said. Isaiah sometimes what, Mr. Thorne? Sometimes forgets his own name? The weasel lawyer pulled out another document. We also have concerns about the child's legitimacy. Nora's mother left the family when she was 3, no marriage certificate on file. If she's illegitimate under state law, she can't inherit regardless of which will stands. Nora's hand found Caleb's, small, cold. Judge Cordell sighed, removed his glasses. This is a mess, gentlemen, and you've put a child in the middle of it. He tapped the handwritten will. Without 2 living, clearly identified witnesses, I can't accept this as valid. And without proof of legitimate birth, inheritance is contested. He looked at Caleb. You have until April 28th to produce both. Otherwise, estate defaults to Mr. Ashby per the typed will. Your Honor, that's my ruling. The gavel came down, sharp crack that echoed off the walls. Marlo stood, straightened his coat, smiled at Caleb on his way out, the kind of smile that said checkmate. In the hallway, the weasel lawyer handed Caleb another paper. Discovery deadline. You'll need to prove clear title to the property and the child's legitimate heirship. 63 days, Mr. Thorne. Clock's ticking. They left, expensive shoes clicking on marble floors. Caleb looked at the paper, then at Nora. We're going to lose, aren't we? She whispered. Outside the window, February snow started falling, the kind that buried things until spring. The church smelled like old hymnals and lemon furniture polish. Reverend Isaiah Watts sat behind a desk cluttered with Sunday school materials and a Bible so worn the leather had gone soft as cloth. He was 65, black in a town that was 90% white, and he'd shepherded this congregation for 30 years through quiet dignity and careful words. When Caleb knocked, Isaiah's face showed he'd been expecting this visit, dreading it maybe. "Come in, Caleb. Nora." He gestured to chairs. "I suppose you want to talk about Pete's will." "You signed it." "I did." Isaiah's hands folded on the desk. Steady, but Caleb could see the tension in his shoulders. 3 days before he died, Pete asked me to witness his wishes, so I did. Judge says the signature reads, I Watt, not Isaiah Watts. Isaiah closed his eyes. "I know." "Why?" The old preacher was quiet for a long moment. Outside, church bells rang the hour. The sound echoed off the surrounding mountains. "Because I was afraid," Isaiah said finally. "Black man's signature on a white family's legal papers in 1974 Wyoming?" He shook his head. "I've seen what happens when men like me get involved in property disputes worth millions. Pete told me about the uranium, the mining companies, the kind of people who'd come looking." He opened his eyes, met Caleb's gaze. "So I signed my name wrong. Not a lie, exactly. I Watt is technically me, but different enough that if anyone came asking, I could claim confusion. Old man's handwriting, presbyopia." His voice dropped. Cowardice dressed up as caution. Nora spoke for the first time. "Grandpa said you were the bravest man he knew." Isaiah's eyes glistened. "Your grandpa was kind, and wrong. He said you stood up to men with hoods when other preachers looked away. He said you preached truth when lies would have been safer." She pulled a small photograph from her coat pocket, handed it to Isaiah. "He kept this in his Bible. You and him and 3 other men rebuilding a burned church, 1965. Isaiah took the photo. His hand trembled. "Freedom Summer," he whispered. "Pete drove all the way to Mississippi to help. Didn't ask for credit. Just showed up with lumber and nails." He looked at Caleb. "Your friend was a good man." "So are you," Caleb said. "And right now, Nora needs you to be brave. One more time." Isaiah set the photo down carefully, pulled his own Bible from the desk drawer. Different from the pulpit one, personal. He opened it to the back cover. Inside, tucked into the binding, was a folded paper. "Pete gave me this the same day we signed the will, said if anything happened to him, if anyone questioned his wishes, I should keep it safe." He unfolded it. A second copy of the handwritten will, this one with Isaiah Watts spelled out in full. "He made 2?" Caleb breathed. "He said men like Marlo count on fear keeping people quiet. So he gave me insurance. A second copy, properly signed, hidden where lawyers wouldn't think to look." Isaiah's voice strengthened. "I'll testify. Full name, no more hiding." Nora reached across the desk, took the old preacher's hand. "Thank you." Isaiah squeezed her hand gently. "I was a coward when your grandpa needed me. I won't be twice." The courthouse was dark except for the records room. Ruth Brigham sat surrounded by ledgers, her grandson Tommy asleep in a chair nearby. He'd driven up from college to help her search. History major, good with dusty documents and cramped handwriting. She'd been at this for 6 hours, eyes burning, back aching. Then she found it, filed in the wrong box, drawer L instead of drawer T. A land office receipt dated April 15th, 1892. Homestead patent filing, Thorne J. Jonathan, 3,000 acres. Railroad grant, filed concurrent with equipment inventory per federal requirement. Below that, a list. Tools, supplies, and at the bottom, railroad lantern, brass, serial RT1T9247, property of J. Thorne. Ruth's heart hammered. She pulled the 1892 ledger closer, cross-referenced the serial number. There, same number, same date. The lantern Caleb had in his kitchen, the one his great-grandfather carried, was listed as proof of filing. Federal Land Office required railroad workers to inventory their equipment when claiming homestead grants. The lantern wasn't just a family heirloom, it was legal evidence. She grabbed the phone, dialed Caleb's number. It rang 8 times before he answered, voice thick with sleep. "Ruth?" "The lantern, your great-grandfather's lantern. Is the serial number still visible?" "What?" "The brass plate. Does it still have the engraving?" Silence. Then, "Hold on." She heard him moving, a match striking, the creak of old hinges. T1T92-047, Caleb said. "Why?" Ruth laughed. Actually laughed. First time in 2 weeks she'd felt anything close to hope. Because I just found the land office receipt that proves your family's owned that ranch since the day it was filed. And that lantern is the key. Outside the courthouse window, Tommy stirred, sat up. Grandma, someone's watching the building. Ruth looked. A shadow moved past the street lamp, disappeared into the alley. The line went dead. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease. Caleb and Nora took a booth in the back, same one he'd sat in for 20 years when he came to town for supplies. This time was different. The conversations didn't stop when they walked in. That would have been too obvious. But they changed, shifted. Voices dropped to whispers that somehow carried better than normal speech. Heard her mama ran off when she was 3. No marriage certificate on file, Linda said. Who's to say Pete was even blood relation? Nora kept her eyes on the menu, didn't look up, but Caleb saw her hands tighten on the laminated edges. The waitress, Sue, worked here 15 years, brought coffee without meeting Caleb's eyes. Know what you want? 2 eggs, toast, milk for her. Sue nodded, left without the small talk she usually made about weather or cattle prices. 3 booths down, a woman Caleb didn't recognize sat with coffee and a newspaper she wasn't reading. Expensive coat, hairstyled in a way that didn't happen at Millie's salon on Main Street. She looked over, made eye contact, smiled, then loud enough to carry. Tragic when children pay for their parents' mistakes. The diner went silent. The woman stood, walked past their booth, dropped a business card on the table. Caroline Ashby Morrison, family law consultant. Denver, Marlo's daughter. She leaned down, voice still pitched for the audience. My father's prepared to be generous. Boarding school, college fund, clean slate. She glanced at Nora. Better than growing up with people whispering about legitimacy. Nora stood so fast her water glass tipped. Didn't spill but came close. She walked straight to the restroom. Didn't run, didn't cry, just walked. Caleb stood too, looked at Caroline. Your father sent you to do this? My father's trying to help a child caught in an ugly situation. She smiled. You're the one making it ugly, Mr. Thorne. She left. The door chimed. Outside, a black sedan pulled away. Caleb found Nora in the restroom, sitting on the floor, drawing in her notebook. Not crying, just drawing with fierce, tight strokes. The sketch showed the courthouse, and beneath it words in careful print. Grandpa said ice house, east fence, spring. What's that mean? I don't know. She looked up. But he made me write it down 3 times. Said if things got bad, I should remember. East fence, ice house, spring. Caleb found them on the east fence line. 3 men in hard hats in a bulldozer that had no business being on his property. They'd already pulled up 2 boundary stakes, the old ones, weathered iron posts his grandfather had set in 1902. 73 years in the ground, and these men had yanked them out like they were nothing more than fence posts. The bulldozer blade was lowering toward a third. Hey! Caleb ran. The foreman saw him coming and signaled. The bulldozer stopped. Engine idling, diesel exhaust thick in the March air. Help you? The foreman didn't look as concerned. This is private property. Actually, the man pulled a paper from his clipboard. County survey says this is disputed boundary. We got a permit to reestablish accurate property lines. Disputed by who? Mineral Rights Assessment Bureau. He handed Caleb the permit. Official seal, signed by the county commissioner. Caleb's hands shook. These markers have been here since 1902. Yeah, well, old surveys weren't always accurate. We're fixing that. The bulldozer lurched forward. Blade hit the 3rd marker. Iron screeched. The post bent, then snapped. 100 years of proof folding like tin. Caleb stepped in front of the machine. The operator killed the engine, climbed down. Big man, worked outdoors his whole life by the look of him. You need to move, sir. You need to get off my land. Sir. Tires on gravel. Caleb turned. Black Cadillac pulling up. Marlo got out. Walked over like he owned the place. Maybe in 60 days he would. Caleb, don't make this harder than it has to be. You got a mining company permit. This isn't about property lines. Marlo's smile was thin. Uranium under your ranch is worth $4.2 million. You think I'm going to let some handwritten will and a little girl stand in the way of that? He pulled a document from his coat, tossed it at Caleb's feet. Mineral assessment contract, signed with Great Basin Mining 3 months ago. Pete knew. That's why he tried to change his will. Marlo's voice hardened. Girl's a legal obstacle. Nothing more. And obstacles get removed. The foreman handed Caleb a demolition completion report. All three 1902 markers, destroyed. Last physical proof of the old boundary lines, gone. Marlo got back in his car, window down. 63 days left, Thorne. Thorne, what's your move? The Cadillac drove away. The crew packed up, left Caleb standing in mud where iron posts used to be, east fence, ice house, spring. He looked at the ground, tried to remember where Pete's old root cellar had been, back when the creek ran different before the county rerouted it in '58, somewhere near here, buried, frozen, waiting for spring. The blizzard broke on a Tuesday morning. Caleb woke to silence, the kind that meant the wind had finally stopped trying to tear the world apart. He found Nora already awake in the kitchen, railroad lantern lit even though the power had come back on during the night. She sat at the table with her notebook, drawing the fence line from memory. "Storm's over," he said. She looked up. "Does that mean we can fix it?" "Fix what?" "The fence, where they broke it." Caleb pulled on his coat, looked out the window. Snow had drifted against the barn, but the sun was breaking through clouds for the first time in a week, warm enough that the icicles hanging from the eaves were starting to drip. "Yeah, we can fix it." They walked to the east fence line together. The snow came up to Nora's knees in places. She struggled through it without complaint, that slight limp from childhood polio making her gait uneven but determined. Where the surveyors had destroyed the old markers, Caleb had already set temporary posts, new wood. Not the same, but they'd hold until he could afford proper iron stakes. He showed her how to splice barbed wire where it had been cut, how to wrap the ends so they wouldn't unravel. His hands remembered the motions. His father had taught him the same way, and his grandfather before that. 3 wires, he said. Top ones for keeping cattle in, bottoms for keeping predators out. Middle one? He paused. Middle one's for reminding folks where they stand. Nora touched the middle wire carefully. Which one are we? Cattle or predators? Neither. We're the ones doing the mending. He pulled the post hole digger from the truck bed. Old tool, handle worn smooth from decades of use, engraved on the metal blade. J. Thorne, 1902, Jonathan Thorne, his great-grandfather, the man who'd built the first fence on this land. Your great-great-grandfather used this? His father before him, probably. Tool like this, you take care of it, it'll outlast you. He demonstrated how to drive it into the half-frozen ground. Harder than summer digging, but not impossible. Your turn. She took the handles. Too big for her hands, but she gripped tight, lifted, drove down. The blade barely scratched the surface. Again, she tried. And again, and again. On the 7th try, the blade bit deep enough to matter. Good. Now lever it out. She did. A plug of frozen earth came up. Steam rose from the hole where warmth from below met March air. They worked in silence for a while. The smell of thawing ground mixed with the scent of pine sap and distant wood smoke from someone's chimney down the valley. On the 4th post, Nora's hand slipped on the digger. The blade caught her palm on a rough spot. Not deep, but enough to draw blood. Caleb wrapped it with a handkerchief from his pocket. Clean, but worn soft from washing. Anything worth protecting draws blood sometimes, he said. She looked at him. Is that why you're bleeding inside? The question hit harder than the March wind. What makes you say that? You don't sleep much. I hear you walking around at night, and sometimes when you think I'm not looking, you touch your chest like something hurts there. She flexed her bandaged hand. Grandpa said some wounds don't show, said the worst ones are the ones people carry quiet. Caleb sat on the truck tailgate. Nora climbed up beside him. I had a wife once, he said, and we were going to have a son. She died in childbirth. He died with her, 20 years ago this May. Is that why you live alone? Was, until you showed up. Are you sorry I did? He looked at her. 9 years old, orphaned, limping, fighting for an inheritance she didn't even understand the size of, brave in ways he'd forgotten how to be. No, I'm sorry it took 20 years for someone to need me again. She leaned against his shoulder, small, solid, real. Grandpa said you were waiting for the right fight, that you'd know it when it came. Your grandpa talked about me too much. He loved you, like a brother. Caleb's throat tightened. He looked at the fence line stretching toward the horizon, the posts they'd set, the wire they'd mended. Temporary repairs on land that had been in his family since before Wyoming was a state. We should head back. Sun's dropping. Uncle Caleb? Yeah? When we win, if we win, can we keep doing this, the fence mending? He helped her down from the tailgate. When we win, we'll do this every spring. Deal? She smiled. First real smile he'd seen from her in 2 weeks. Deal. They walked back toward the ranch house. Behind them, the new fence posts stood straight in the ground. Not iron, not permanent, but holding the line just the same. Earl's Hardware had been on Main Street since 1947. Same year Ruth started at the courthouse. Same year Caleb's father came back from the war and started running the ranch full-time. Earl himself was 72, hands gnarled from arthritis, but still strong enough to lift 50-pound feed sacks. He stood behind the counter when Caleb walked in, sorting screws into small paper bags, with the careful precision of a man who'd been doing the same task for 50 years. Caleb. He didn't look up. Need something? Fence staples, box of 3-inch. Earl reached under the counter, pulled out the box, set it down harder than necessary. That'll be $4.50. Caleb handed him a 5. Earl made change. The transaction happened in silence thick enough to taste. Earl, something wrong? The old man's jaw worked. He glanced toward the front window. Across the street, a black sedan was parked. Same one Caroline had driven away in at the diner. You should know, Earl said quietly. Frank Morrison at the bank called me last week, said I should think carefully about who I do business with, said property disputes can get messy, said sometimes it's better to stay neutral. Frank's Marlo's poker buddy. I know who he is. Earl's voice dropped further. He's also the man who approved my equipment loan last year. $30,000, still owe $22,000. The door chimed. 2 women came in, Millie from the salon and her sister. They looked at Caleb, looked away, moved to the paint section and started talking in whispers that carried. Heard the judge might rule against him. Well, if she's not legitimate. Seems cruel, though. She's just a child. Earl's hands stilled on the screw sorting. Caleb picked up his staples. Thanks, Earl. Wait. Earl reached under the counter again, pulled out a manila envelope. His hands shook slightly. Surveyor crew was in here 3 weeks ago, bought supplies, chalk line, stakes, the works. He pushed the envelope across. Left these blueprints on my counter, said it was an accident. Came back for them the next day. Why are you telling me this? Because I made copies first. Earl's voice steadied. I fought in Korea, Caleb. I know what it looks like when someone's running a campaign. And this, he tapped the envelope. This is a campaign. They're not surveying boundaries, they're mapping mineral deposits. Caleb opened the envelope. Inside, blueprints showing his ranch property, overlaid with topographical markers and highlighted sections labeled with chemical symbols. U-238, uranium, concentrated in 3 areas. The largest deposit ran directly under where the old root cellar used to be, near the east fence, where Pete had told Nora to remember. Jesus, Caleb breathed. There's more. Earl pulled out a ledger, his personal accounts book. Frank Morrison's been calling other businesses, diner, feed store, garage, telling them to stop serving you. Janet at the diner already caved, said she can't afford to lose her restaurant loan. But you can afford to lose yours? Earl smiled, thin, tired. I'm 72 years old. I'll be dead before they foreclose. But that little girl you're fighting for, she's got 70 more years ahead of her, maybe more. He closed the ledger. Some things are worth the risk. The door chimed again. This time it was Tommy, Ruth's grandson, out of breath like he'd been running. Mr. Thorne, Grandma needs you at the courthouse. Now. Ruth's office smelled like old paper and the lavender hand lotion she'd used for 30 years. She sat at her desk, face pale, holding a file folder like it might explode. Tommy stood by the door, and, sitting in the chair, across from Ruth, Caroline, Ashby Morrison, Marlo's daughter. Caleb stopped in the doorway. What's this? Sit down, Ruth said. You need to hear this. Caroline looked different than she had at the diner. No expensive coat, hair pulled back simply, eyes red like she'd been crying. Mr. Thorne? Her voice was steady but quiet. I need to tell you something about my father. Caleb stayed standing. I don't want to hear anything you have to say. I don't blame you, after what I did at the diner. She stopped, started again. I came to apologize, and to help. Help. Yes. She opened her purse, pulled out a small recording device, the kind lawyers used for depositions. I've been recording my father's phone calls for 3 weeks, since I realized what he was planning. She pressed play. Marlo's voice came through tinny but clear. Don't care what it costs. The state home in Cheyenne has a long-term care wing. I need her placed there by May 1st. Another voice, older, administrative. Mr. Ashby, we generally require medical necessity for placement. The child would need to be... She has a limp. Childhood polio. That's medical necessity. Sir, polio survivors don't require institutional care. I'm paying you $50,000. Find a reason. Silence on the recording, then. We'll need a psychiatric evaluation. If she's deemed unable to care for herself, whatever it takes. Just have the paperwork ready. Caroline stopped the recording. Her hands trembled. I was in the next room when he made that call. I knew he wanted the money. I didn't know... Her voice broke. I didn't know he was planning to lock her away. Ruth's face was stone. There's more. Caroline pulled papers from her purse. Old documents, birth certificate, marriage license. My grandfather, Pete, he kept these in his Bible. My father doesn't know I have them. She laid them on the desk. Nora's parents were married. Church wedding, 1965, legal and recorded. She pointed to the marriage license. Sarah Ashby and Michael Morrison. My mother's maiden name was Sarah Ashby, Pete's daughter. Michael Morrison was her husband. Why does this matter? Caleb asked. Because my father's been telling the court that Nora's mother ran off with some man she wasn't married to, that Nora was born out of wedlock. It's a lie. Caroline's voice hardened. Sarah died in a car accident when Nora was 3. Michael died with her. My grandfather raised Nora alone after that. Everything was legal. Everything was legitimate. Ruth examined the documents. These are originals, not copies. I took them from my father's safe last night. He's been hiding them to support his legitimacy challenge. Caroline looked at Caleb. I'm his daughter, but he's a monster, and I won't help him destroy a child's life for money. Caleb sat down slowly. Why should I trust you? Because I brought something else. She pulled out a key, small, brass. This opens the storage unit where my father's keeping the original 1892 deed, the one that was stolen from the courthouse vault. Jerry Hollis, the clerk, he gave it to my father. My father paid him $5,000 and promised him a job with the mining company after this is all over. Ruth's hands clenched. Where's the storage unit? Cheyenne, Unit 247 at Store Safe on Highway 85. Caroline set the key on the desk. I don't know if this helps, but it's all I have to give. She stood. Caleb stood too. Why are you doing this? Caroline's eyes met his. Because when I was 9 years old, my father forgot my birthday. Pete didn't. He drove 3 hours to bring me a cake he'd baked himself. Chocolate. My favorite. She smiled, sad. He said family was the people who showed up, and my father's never shown up for anyone but himself. She walked to the door, stopped. The hearing's April 28th. That's 16 days from now. He's planning something for the week before. I don't know what, but he told someone on the phone they won't see it coming. She left. The door closed quietly behind her. Ruth picked up the key. Tommy, you still have your college friend with the truck? Yeah. How fast can you get to Cheyenne? Tommy grinned. 3 hours if I don't stop for gas. Go, get that deed. Bring it straight back here. Don't stop, don't tell anyone. She looked at Caleb. We've got 16 days to finish what Pete started. Caleb picked up the marriage license, ran his thumb over the signatures. Pete's daughter, Nora's mother, a whole family tree that Marlo had tried to cut down with lies. Ruth, you said you found the lantern serial number in the old land office records. I did. Cross-references with your great-grandfather's homestead filing. Could you testify to that in court? I'm a county employee. My testimony might be seen as biased. But the records aren't biased, Ruth smiled. First real smile he'd seen from her in weeks. No, records don't lie. People do. She pulled out a massive ledger. 1892, Land Office Registry. Opened it to a page marked with a yellow ribbon. There. In faded but still legible script, April 15th, 1892. Thorne, Jonathan. 3,000 acres. Railroad homestead grant. Equipment inventory filed. Tools, wagon, livestock, lantern. Brass, serial T1T92-047. Deed filed concurrent. Mineral rights included per federal statute. If we can prove the lantern in your kitchen is the same one listed here, Ruth said, we prove continuous ownership. Unbroken chain of title from 1892 to now. The serial number's still there. I checked. Then we have half of what we need. She tapped the marriage license. And now we have the other half, legitimacy. Tommy was already halfway out the door. I'll be back by midnight. Ruth called after him. Drive careful. You're carrying evidence that could put men in prison. The door closed. The office fell quiet except for the ticking of Ruth's desk clock and the distant sound of traffic on Main Street. Caleb looked at the blueprints Earl had given him, the mineral deposit map. The uranium seems running through his land like veins of poison. $4.2 million, he said quietly. That's what Marlo told me it's worth. More than that now. Uranium prices went up 15% last month. Energy crisis. Ruth closed the ledger carefully. Men have killed for less. Pete knew that's why he changed his will. And that's why someone poisoned him. Caleb looked at her sharply. What? Ruth pulled another file. Medical records. I've been doing some research. Pete's doctor noted unusual symptoms in his final months. Neurological issues, kidney problems, consistent with heavy metal poisoning. She met his eyes. I can't prove it, but I'd bet everything I own that someone was slowly killing him to speed up the inheritance. The window rattled, wind picking up outside. The kind of wind that came before spring storms. 16 days until the hearing. 16 days to prove a century of ownership, a child's legitimacy, and a conspiracy that ran from a county clerk's office to a mining company boardroom. Caleb picked up the brass key Caroline had left. One thing I don't understand, he said. Pete told Nora to remember. Ice house, east fence, spring. Why spring? What's waiting for spring? Ruth looked at the blueprints, at the mineral deposit map, at the place where the largest uranium concentration sat directly under where the old root cellar used to be. The creek, she said slowly. It's been frozen since January, runs right past the east fence. She traced the line on the map. If there's something buried there, something Pete wanted you to find, it won't surface until the ice melts. They looked at each other. Outside, the temperature was climbing. 42 degrees, the warmest it had been since November. Spring was coming, and with it, whatever Pete had left behind. The check sat on the kitchen table like an accusation. $50,000, made out to Caleb Thorne, signed by Marlo's lawyer, delivered that afternoon by a courier who wouldn't meet his eyes. The note attached was simple. Walk away. Take the girl somewhere safe. This ends. Caleb stared at it. Outside, March wind rattled the windows. The railroad lantern cast shadows that moved across the walls like ghosts. 50,000 would buy a new start. Montana, maybe. Or Oregon. Somewhere Marlo's lawyers couldn't find them. Somewhere Nora could grow up without people whispering about legitimacy and inheritance and blood that might not be blood. He could protect her, just not here, not on this land, the land his great-grandfather had claimed. His grandfather had defended. His father had died on heart attack while mending the north fence, 1968. 4 generations of Thorns, all of them holding this ground, all of them believing it mattered. Caleb picked up the check, held it to the lantern light. The paper was heavy, expensive, real. The door to Nora's room creaked. She stood in the hallway wearing the oversized shirt he'd given her to sleep in, hair tangled, eyes clear. You're thinking about taking it, she said. Not a question, statement of fact. I'm thinking about keeping you safe. Running away isn't safe, it's just slower dying. She walked to the table, looked at the check. Grandpa said you'd know when to fight, and that you'd know when to walk away. He said they were different things. What's the difference? Walking away is choosing something better. Running away is choosing to stop choosing. She pulled out a chair, sat. Which is this? Caleb set the check down. His hands were shaking. I don't know. Yes, you do. He looked at her, 9 years old, orphaned, fighting for a future she didn't even understand, trusting him to know the right answer when he barely trusted himself. If I fight this and lose, they'll take you anyway. Put you in that state home. Lock you away because your limp makes you defective. His voice cracked. At least if I take the money, we go together. To where? Some town where nobody knows us? Where I grow up wondering if my grandpa was wrong to trust you? She shook her head. That's not safer. That's just lonelier. Nora, he left me something. Grandpa. In the ice house. Her voice was certain. I don't know what it is, but he made me promise to find it. And I can't do that in Montana. Caleb rubbed his face. 20 years of isolation, and now this child was asking him to fight the kind of battle that destroyed families, the kind he'd walked away from once before. What if I'm not strong enough? She reached across the table, took his hand, small fingers wrapping around his calloused palm. Then we'll be not strong enough together. The lantern flickered. Wind gusted. Outside, something moved in the darkness. Probably deer, maybe cattle that had broken through the fence. Nora stood, went to the mantel, came back with an old photograph Caleb kept in a frame he never looked at anymore. 3 men, young, building fence together, 1955. Caleb on the left, Pete in the middle. Thomas, Caleb's brother, dead 20 years, on the right. All of them grinning, all of them believing the world made sense and hard work mattered, and family meant something. On the back, in Pete's handwriting, brothers by blood, by choice, by dirt. PT. He gave this to you? Caleb's throat was tight. No, I found it in his Bible, with the marriage license and the other papers. Nora traced the edge of the frame. He told me once that you and Uncle Thomas fought over something that didn't matter, that you left because you thought leaving would stop the hurting. But it just moved the hurt somewhere else. That's not... Caleb stopped, because it was true. I thought I was doing the right thing. Maybe you were, then. She set the photograph down. But now's different. Now someone needs you to stay. Caleb looked at the check, looked at the photograph, looked at this child who spoke with her grandfather's wisdom and her own fierce clarity. He picked up the check, tore it in half, tore it again, let the pieces fall like snow onto the kitchen table. Okay, he said. We fight. Nora smiled, went back to bed without another word. Like the matter had been settled all along, and she'd just been waiting for him to catch up. Caleb sat alone with the torn check and the old photograph and the lantern that had guided 4 generations of Thorns through darkness. Outside, the temperature was rising, 48 degrees. The creek ice would break soon. Whatever Pete had hidden, whatever truth waited frozen in the ground, spring would bring it home. The courthouse steps couldn't hold 200 people, so Judge Cordell moved the hearing to the church. Not inside, outside, on the wide stone steps where the whole town could witness. April rain had come overnight, soft, steady, smelling like thawed earth and new grass. By morning it had stopped, leaving the world clean and dripping, the kind of spring morning that made promises about rebirth and second chances. Caleb stood with Nora on one side, Ruth on the other. Behind them, Tommy with a leather satchel, Earl from the hardware store, the doctor who'd treated Nora's polio when she was 4, a dozen other townspeople who'd decided that silence was the same as complicity. Across the steps, Marlo and his lawyers, 3 of them now, all expensive suits and briefcases that cost more than most families made in a month. Judge Cordell sat in a chair someone had carried from the courthouse. No bench, no gavel, just an old man in black robes trying to find truth in a mess of lies and legal maneuvering. We're here, he said, voice carrying across the crowd, because the courthouse is a public building, and this is public business. Mr. Ashby contests his uncle's handwritten will. Mr. Thorne defends it. The law requires proof of validity and proof of legitimate heirship. He looked at both men. Present your evidence. Marlo's lead lawyer stood. Your Honor, we maintain that the handwritten document lacks proper witnessing. One witness is deceased. The other, Reverend Watts, signed incorrectly, casting doubt on the document's authenticity. Furthermore, the child's legitimacy remains unproven. No marriage certificate has been filed? No, that's a lie. Caroline Ashby Morrison stood from the crowd, walked up the steps, handed the judge 2 documents. Marriage license, Sarah Ashby and Michael Morrison, married June 12, 1965, at this church. Her voice was steady, loud enough for everyone to hear. Birth certificate, Nora Marie Morrison, born March 3, 1966, parents listed, Sarah Ashby Morrison and Michael Morrison. Both documents were hidden in my father's safe to support a false legitimacy challenge. The crowd murmured. Marlo's face went white, then red. Caroline, I'm sorry, Father, but I won't help you imprison a child for money. Judge Cordell examined the documents. These appear authentic. County seal. Proper signatures. He looked at Marlo. Mr. Ashby, did you knowingly withhold evidence? Marlo's lawyer jumped in. Your Honor, family documents are often misfiled. In a safe, the judge's voice was ice. Let's move on. The question of witnessing. Reverend Isaiah Watts stood, walked up the steps slowly, each step deliberate. He carried his personal Bible, the one from his office, not the pulpit Bible. Your Honor, I witnessed Peter Ashby's will on March 10, 1975, 3 days before he died. Isaiah's voice rang clear. I signed my name as I. Watt because I was afraid. Afraid of getting involved in a property dispute worth millions. Afraid of what might happen to a black preacher who stood between white men and their money. He opened the Bible, withdrew a paper. But Pete knew I was afraid, so he had me sign a second copy, this one with my full name. He told me to keep it safe, to bring it out when the time came. Isaiah handed it to the judge. The time's come. I'm Isaiah Watts. I witnessed that will, and I'll swear to it before God in this town. The crowd erupted, people standing, craning to see. Judge Cordell raised his hand for silence. This is a duplicate of the handwritten will, properly signed. He looked at Marlo's lawyers. 2 witnesses, both living, both present. The will stands as valid. Marlo's lead lawyer wasn't done. Your Honor, the will may be valid, but it bequeaths property Mr. Thorne cannot prove he owns. The original 1892 homestead deed is missing from county records. Without clear title, we found it. Tommy stepped forward, opened the satchel, pulled out a metal deed box, old and battered. Storage unit in Cheyenne, Unit 247, rented by Marlo Ashby. He handed the judge the key Caroline had provided. Jerry Hollis, county clerk, stole this from the courthouse vault, sold it to Mr. Ashby for $5,000. We recovered it last night. Ruth stood. Your Honor, I can verify that deed box was stolen from my vault. I can also verify, she pulled out the massive 1892 ledger, that the homestead deed inside cross-reference with this land office registry, filed April 15, 1892, Jonathan Thorne, 3,000 acres. She opened the ledger, pointed to a line. Equipment inventory includes a brass railroad lantern, serial number T1892047. She nodded to Caleb. Show them. Caleb lifted the lantern he'd brought, held it so sunlight caught the engraved plate, T1892047. Same lantern, Ruth said. Continuous ownership from 1892 to now, unbroken chain of title. The Thorne family has owned that land for 83 years. Judge Cordell examined the deed, the ledger, the lantern. The crowd was silent, 200 people holding their breath. Mr. Ashby, the judge's voice cut like a blade, did you pay Jerry Hollis to steal county records? Marlo stood. Your Honor, A truck pulled up, sheriff's vehicle. 2 deputies got out, followed by a man in a federal marshal's badge. The marshal walked up the steps, handed the judge a warrant. Federal investigation into mineral rights fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. We have evidence that Peter Ashby was poisoned with heavy metals over a 6-month period. He looked at Marlo. We have phone records showing you contacted a mining company about uranium rights 3 months before his death. We have financial records showing payments to Jerry Hollis. He pulled out handcuffs. Marlo Ashby, you're under arrest. The crowd exploded. Marlo's lawyers stepped back. Marlo himself just stood there, face gray, as the cuffs clicked shut. You think you won? He looked at Caleb as the deputies led him away. She'll hate you for this someday, keeping her from millions. Caleb didn't answer, just took Nora's hand. Judge Cordell stood. The handwritten will is valid. Nora Ashby is the legitimate heir to Peter Ashby's estate. Caleb Thorne is appointed legal guardian and trustee until she reaches age 25. He looked at the crowd. This hearing is concluded. People cheered. Earl clapped Caleb on the shoulder. Ruth hugged Nora. Isaiah offered a prayer of thanksgiving that people actually bowed their heads for. And through it all, Caleb held Nora's hand and felt something in his chest unknot for the first time in 20 years. The creek ice had broken 3 days earlier. Caleb had heard it in the night, a sound like the earth cracking open, followed by the rush of water finally allowed to move again after 4 months of frozen silence. Now, with the hearing finished and Marlo in federal custody, Caleb and Nora walked the east fence line one more time. Tommy came with them, and Ruth, though her knees complained about the uneven ground. And Isaiah, who said he wanted to see what Pete had been planning all along. The old root cellar sat 20 yards from the fence, half buried in a hillside that the 1958 creek rerouting had left high and dry. Stone walls covered in 70 years of moss and dirt, wooden door rotted through in places. Caleb had walked past it 1,000 times, never thought much about it. Just another relic from when his grandparents had needed to keep food cold before electricity reached the mountain. Here? Tommy asked. Nora nodded. Grandpa made me draw it, over and over, until I could sketch it from memory. She pulled out her notebook. The drawing she'd made matched the structure in front of them perfectly. Caleb pulled the door. Hinges screamed. Inside, Darkness and the smell of wet stone and earth that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. Tommy shined a flashlight. The beam caught something wrapped in oilcloth on a stone shelf. Caleb reached for it. The cloth crackled, frozen stiff despite the spring thaw. He carried it outside into the light, unwrapped it carefully. Inside, another deed box, smaller than the one they'd recovered from the storage unit, and beside it, wrapped separately. A second railroad lantern, twin to the one in Caleb's kitchen. Brass plate engraved, P. Ashby 1955, Pete's lantern, the one he'd carried working on the railroad before he'd settled in town. Tied to the handle, a note. Pete's handwriting, shaky but legible. Caleb, if you're reading this, you won. Marlo's in custody or dead, and Nora's safe. The deed box has the original mineral rights transfer, signed by my father in 1920, giving the Thorne family permanent rights to anything under this land. Your great-grandfather and my grandfather were partners, built the railroad together, filed their homesteads side by side. When uranium was found in '72, I made sure the rights stayed with you. Marlo never knew. 2 lanterns, yours from 1892, mine from 1955, your great-grandfather lit the way west. I'm lighting the way forward. Keep them both burning. The money's not important. The land's not important. What's important is that you remember, family isn't blood. It's who you'd walk through a blizzard for. Take care of her. She's the best thing our family's ever made. Your brother, Pete. Caleb's hands shook. Ruth took the letter, read it, passed it to Isaiah. The old preacher's eyes glistened. Brothers, Isaiah said softly. Not by blood, by choice. Nora took the second lantern, held it next to the one Caleb had brought. 2 lights, 2 generations, 2 men who'd understood that some legacies couldn't be measured in dollars or acres. What's in the deed box? Tommy asked. Ruth opened it. Inside, the mineral rights transfer Pete had mentioned. And beneath that, a thick envelope. Caleb's name written on the front. He opened it. Inside, adoption papers, pre-filled, dated March 12th, 1975, 2 days before Pete died. Petition for legal adoption. Petitioner, Caleb Thorne. Minor child, Nora Marie Ashby. All the blanks filled in, all the language legal and proper, just waiting for a signature and a judge's approval. Pete had known, had planned for this exact outcome, had believed, despite everything, despite the odds, that Caleb would fight, would win, would choose fatherhood over isolation. He knew, Caleb whispered. The whole time. He knew. Nora took his hand. He said you were the strongest man in these mountains, that you just needed someone to fight for. Ruth smiled, pulled reading glasses from her purse. Well, these adoption papers won't file themselves. Courthouse opens at 8 tomorrow morning. They drove to the east fence where the surveyors had destroyed the old boundary markers. Caleb pulled the post hole digger from the truck bed, his great-grandfather's digger, the one engraved Whitethorn 1902. Your turn, he said to Nora. She took the handles, lifted, drove the blade into soft April earth. This time it bit deep on the first try. Spring had thawed the ground, made it ready for new things to take root. They worked together, Caleb guiding, Nora digging. When the hole was deep enough, he pulled a new iron post from the truck. Not temporary wood this time. Permanent metal that would last another 70 years. Nora set it in the hole. Caleb steadied it while she packed dirt around the base. Then together they drove it home with a sledgehammer that had hung in the barn since before either of them was born. 3 strikes. The post stood straight and true. Behind them, the community watched. Ruth and Tommy, Earl, Isaiah, Caroline, who'd driven back from Cheyenne to see the end of what she'd helped start, the doctor, the diner owner, who'd quietly started serving Caleb again once Marlo was arrested. 20 people, 30, all of them witnesses to a different kind of justice than courtrooms provided. Caleb rested his hand on top of the post. Like your grandpa taught me, now I'm teaching you. Nora placed her hand beside his. Land don't remember names. It remembers who tends it. Isaiah stepped forward, offered a blessing without being asked. Lord, bless this ground and those who'll work it. Bless the child who inherits it and the man who'll guide her. Bless the memory of Pete Ashby, who knew that family is built, not born. Amen. Amen, the crowd echoed. The sun dropped toward the western ridge. Golden light spilled across the valley. The fence line stretched toward the horizon, 3 wires humming in the evening breeze. Top for keeping what mattered in. Bottom for keeping what threatened out. Middle for reminding the world where one family's responsibility ended and another's began. Caleb looked at Nora. She looked back, smiled. Ready to go home? He asked. She nodded. Yeah, home. They walked back to the truck together. Behind them, the new post caught the last sunlight. Solid, permanent proof that some things, land, legacy, love, couldn't be bought or stolen or broken by men whose only measure of worth was money. The community dispersed, trucks and cars pulling away, voices carrying on the wind about dinners to cook and chores to finish and tomorrow's work waiting, ordinary life resuming. But different now, changed by a child who'd refused to be abandoned and a man who'd remembered how to fight for something that mattered. 3 weeks later, the adoption papers were signed. Judge Cordell handled it in his chambers. No ceremony, no crowd, just Caleb, Nora, Ruth as witness, and Isaiah offering a quiet prayer. Nora kept Ashby as her middle name. Not for Marlo, he was awaiting trial in federal prison, but for Pete, who'd carried it with honor and planned for this moment from beyond the grave. The ranch stayed in trust, managed by Ruth until Nora turned 25. The uranium stayed in the ground. Some legacies, Caleb decided, were worth more buried than sold. Spring came full that year. Meadowlarks returned to the high pastures 2 weeks early. Creek ran clear and cold, all trace of ice gone except in memory. The fence posts stood straight, new iron beside old wood, both holding the line. The 2 railroad lanterns sat side by side on the mantel. His great-grandfather's from 1892, Pete's from 1955. Twins separated by generations, reunited by a child's need and an old man's foresight. Caleb lit them both some nights when the power was working fine, but he wanted the reminder of men who'd built things to last. Nora planted a garden behind the house. Tomatoes, mostly, because Pete had loved them. She talked to the plants the way he'd talked to her, soft, patient, telling them stories about men who built railroads and women who kept records and preachers who found courage late but found it true. Caleb watched from the porch, mending a bridle that didn't really need mending, just needed his hands busy while his heart learned to settle into something it hadn't felt in 20 years. Fatherhood at 52 felt like breaking a horse you thought was too wild to ride, terrifying, humbling, and somehow exactly right. "Uncle Caleb," Nora called from the garden. She'd kept the title. Some habits were worth preserving. "Yeah? Think Grandpa would be proud?" He looked at the garden, the lanterns glowing warm through the window, the fence stretching toward mountains that knew their names. The girl who'd walked through a blizzard of grief and greed and come out whole. "I reckon he'd say we did all right." She smiled, went back to her tomatoes. The wind carried the scent of turned earth and new growth. Caleb closed his eyes, let the May sun warm his face, and felt, for the first time in 20 years, like he'd finally come home, not to a place, to a person worth staying for.